Hello, my name is Daisy Roan, and at 19, my family erased me. At a family dinner, my father hit me across the face, and my sister called me trash, while everyone else just watched. They sold my future with a forged signature and cut me out of their photos, their chats, their lives, like I never existed. 10 years later, I built a life on the land they stole. Now they're at my gate saying, "We're moving in, we have a right, we're family." But if they erased me once, what do you think I'm about to erase now? It was late spring in Charleston, South Carolina. The air felt heavy and sweet, carrying the smell of wet magnolia leaves from the yard into my grandmother's old house. I was 19, standing in front of her dining room mirror, tugging nervously at the hem of a dress I had borrowed from a coworker at the coffee shop. The neckline felt too loose, the sleeves too tight. Still, I wanted to look like I belonged. I clutched a small wrapped box, just a scented candle I had bought with tips, and told myself that this dinner could be a new start. My grandmother Delphine was turning 75 that night. She had been the only one who ever made me feel steady, the one who whispered encouragement when my father barked at me, the one who taught me to save my pennies. Her home had always been a sanctuary. The creaking pine floors, the lace curtains stained faintly yellow from decades of summer sun. I thought if I showed up calm and polite, maybe the old peace would hold. At 6:30 p.m., the dining room glowed under a chandelier of dusty crystals. Callista, my older sister, stood near the head of the table in a pale blue dress, pouring wine like a hostess at some charity gala. She had always been the star of the family, the one my parents bragged about, the one whose mistakes were rebranded as adventures. Tonight, she barely looked at me, just smirked and kept filling glasses. My father, Wardell, was already sitting, his shirt collar open, cheeks ruddy from bourbon. My mother, Isolde, fluttered at the edges of the room arranging plates, making herself small. A few cousins were there, faces stiff with politeness. The atmosphere felt brittle, like a glass just before it cracks. I slid into my seat near the foot of the table. My palms were slick. "Happy birthday, Grandma," I said softly, placing the candle box by Delphine's plate. She smiled at me with that tired warmth of hers and patted my hand. "Thank you, Daisy. You're thoughtful as always." We began to eat, roasted chicken, collard greens, cornbread, all the flavors of my childhood. For a few minutes, there was only the clink of silverware and murmured talk. I let myself believe, foolishly, that this could stay civil. Then the conversation shifted. Callista bragged about a new investment she and Dad had made, selling a piece of dead land near the marsh to fund her boutique. She said it like she was reading from a press release, eyes bright with self-satisfaction. Something in my chest tightened. That land had been promised to me by Grandma when I was 15. We'd walked it together, and she'd said, "This will be yours someday, a place to plant your own roots." I cleared my throat, voice low but steady. "I didn't know you sold that," I said. "Nobody told me." My father set down his fork with a loud clack. "You weren't using it. We needed to make a decision. Don't start with your attitude tonight." "I wasn't asked," I replied, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound calm. "And my name was on the title. You couldn't have sold it without—" "Without what?" Callista cut in, laughing, swirling her wine. "Without your permission. Please. You've never contributed a dime to anything. You're lucky Dad even keeps you on the insurance." I felt the heat rise up my neck. "I worked for that land. I helped Grandma maintain it." "You're ungrateful," my father snapped, his words sharp as a switch. "We give you everything and you still whine. You bring this nonsense to your grandmother's birthday?" "I'm not whining. I'm asking for honesty." My hands trembled in my lap, but my voice held. And then it happened. A flash of movement. The back of his hand connecting with my face, hard enough that my teeth clacked together, and the room tilted. A wine glass toppled and shattered on the floor. Gasps filled the air, then silence. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned, my cheek burning, the copper taste of blood in my mouth. I searched the faces around the table for someone, anyone, to say something. My mother looked down at her napkin. My cousins stared at their plates. Only Callista spoke, her lips curling. "Why are we surprised?" she said, her voice sweet and poisonous. Trash stays trash. The word hung in the air like smoke, trash. It wasn't the first insult she'd thrown at me, but tonight it felt like a verdict. I didn't cry. My body went still, like it always did in danger. Inside, a door slammed shut. I thought, I'm not a daughter anymore. I'm a problem they're erasing. I pushed back from the table slowly, careful not to trip over the broken glass. "Excuse me," I murmured. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even called my name. Outside, the evening air hit me like cool water. The sky was streaked with violet. I walked across the yard to my grandmother's garden, the one place that had always felt like mine. Fireflies floated above the azaleas. My lip was bleeding. I dabbed it with my sleeve. I leaned against the old stone bench where Grandma used to sit with me, teaching me the names of herbs. In the distance, I heard laughter drift from the house. Callista's voice, my father's booming reply. They had already gone back to their meal. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification from the family lawyer. I opened it without thinking, and there it was. Confirming the sale of parcel number 48, signed by all parties. A PDF attached, my name at the bottom forged. 2 betrayals in one night. The slap and the signature. My stomach dropped. I sat there for a long time, the garden around me fading into darkness. My grandmother's window glowed faintly upstairs. I could see her silhouette moving, but she didn't come down. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my pride, all the times I had tried to be useful, invisible, harmless. And in one evening, they had made it clear. I wasn't part of them. I was something disposable. I pressed my hand against the bench, feeling the rough stone under my palm. My phone felt heavy in my other hand, my heart even heavier. And just like that, I was gone. And just like that, I was gone. No dramatic exit, no goodbye, just a 19-year-old girl slipping out of a house where her face no longer mattered. I didn't even feel the gravel biting into my bare feet as I crossed the driveway. My cheek still pulsed where my father had struck me. The night smelled of salt and cut grass. I kept walking until the streetlight glow gave way to a darker road and the hum of the highway. At a bus stop near the edge of Charleston, I sat down on a splintered bench, clutching my grandmother's scarf in one hand and my phone in the other. Blood from my split lip had dried into a faint metallic taste. I typed a single message to my mother. "Did you mean to just let that happen?" And hit send. No dots, no reply. The screen stayed blank. When the late-night Greyhound pulled up, I climbed aboard without thinking. The driver gave me a quick, startled glance at my bare feet, but didn't ask questions. I slid into a seat at the back, knees drawn up, trying to shrink inside myself. Outside the window, the marshes slid past, black water glinting in the moonlight. Inside, my head replayed the slap, Callista's smirk, the word trash echoing like a bell. I wasn't crying. I felt hollow, like a house stripped of its furniture. I got off 2 hours later in Savannah because it was far enough to feel different, but close enough that I could still catch my breath. I paid cash for a week at a cheap motel, the kind with ice machines rattling outside and a smell of bleach clinging to the sheets. For days I stayed there, going out only to buy ramen and coffee from the gas station next door. I slept in bursts, jolting awake with the echo of my father's voice in my ears. Things you learn when you're erased. You can vanish quickly, but the sound of your own name takes longer to fade. A week after the dinner, I tried to log into the family group chat out of some masochistic instinct, needing to see their words. I was gone, no trace of my number. It was as if I had never been added. On Instagram, every tag that had once linked me to family photos had been stripped. My birthday came and went in silence. No calls, no texts. It was a living funeral no one invited me to. One night I scrolled to my grandmother's memorial page on Facebook. Callista had posted a glossy picture of the family at the birthday dinner. "Our family stands strong, always." In the image, everyone was smiling, glasses raised. I wasn't there. They hadn't even left an empty chair where I had sat. I stared at that caption until the words blurred. I didn't die. They just decided I wasn't there anymore. The next morning, I went to a strip mall phone store and paid cash for a prepaid phone, a clean number. I changed my last name on my job application to Lise. my grandmother's maiden name. It was a small, defiant act. In the motel mirror, I said it out loud. Daisy Lease. The sound felt strange but steadier than the girl who had sat at that table. 2 months later, when the sting of the slap had dulled into a scar of memory, I ran into an old high school friend at a grocery store in Savannah. She did a double take, then smiled too wide. Wow, Daisy, I wasn't sure it was you. Your mom has that big framed picture of the family now. It's beautiful. My hands froze on the handle of my cart. Picture? Yeah, she said, oblivious to my tightening jaw. It's from your 18th birthday, I think. Everyone looks amazing. She hesitated, lowering her voice. I guess you two aren't talking, huh? I forced a polite nod and left before she could say more. That night, curiosity burned through my caution. I drove my borrowed car toward Charleston at dusk, parking a block from the house. The curtains in the living room glowed warm. Through a thin gap, I could see the mantel. And there it was. The same photograph from my 18th birthday, now blown up, reframed. My arm around Grandma replaced by Callista's. My face cropped out entirely, the space digitally filled with her perfect smile. It wasn't enough to erase me. They needed to replace me. I stood there a long time in the sticky evening air, mosquitoes biting my ankles. Inside, my father laughed at something on TV. My mother passed behind him carrying a tray. For one heartbeat, I thought she looked toward the window, but if she did, she didn't react. I turned and walked back to the car without knocking, my footsteps slow but deliberate. My palms were steady on the steering wheel. In my head, only one sentence repeated, over and over, not as a whimper, but as a quiet vow. Trash doesn't belong in portraits. Trash doesn't belong in portraits. That sentence had followed me like a ghost for a decade. 10 years later, I was 29, standing barefoot on the cool planks of my veranda, the Atlantic stretching out before me like a promise I had claimed with my own 2 hands. The morning light spilled in clean and blue, bouncing off the white columns of the house I had restored board by board. The same land they had sold without my consent now bore my name, not theirs. It was the headquarters of my foundation, a shelter for women who needed a second chance, survivors, the kind of women who arrived at night clutching nothing but bruises and silence. Sometimes, when the wind carried the salt and marsh grass inland, I thought of the girl I had once been, boarding a midnight bus with blood under her fingernails, silent but unbroken. I cradled a mug of tea in one hand and a roll of architectural plans in the other. We were expanding the dormitories, 20 more beds, a kitchen for communal meals, a library. My phone buzzed endlessly with emails, donors in New York asking about budgets, photos from a ribbon cutting in Savannah, questions about construction permits. This was my life now, measured, deliberate, self-built. The girl who'd been called trash had become a CEO with her own board of directors. Then the intercom at the front gate chimed. At first, I assumed it was a delivery. The groundskeeper had already gone for the day, so I set down my tea, patted across the tile, and flicked on the surveillance monitor. The screen lit up with faces I had trained myself not to see. My father, Wardell, stood at the front. Heavier now, but still carrying that air of command like a weapon. Beside him was Callista, hair lacquered into perfection, sunglasses shoved up onto her scalp like a crown. My mother lingered behind them, hands clasped in nervous prayer, eyes darting across the property like she was cataloging what might soon belong to her again. 2 cousins I barely recognized hovered in the background, faces tight with expectancy. For a long second, I just stared. The sunlight was harsh enough to blur their features on the screen, but not enough to erase their smiles. Smiles like tourists arriving at a hotel lobby, certain their reservation was waiting. My hand trembled only slightly as I pressed the intercom button. Yes? My father's voice cracked through, deeper now but sharp as ever. We're moving in. We have a right. We're family. The words struck like cold air through an open door. 10 years of silence, and this was how he began. Not hello, not how are you, just we're moving in. Before I could respond, Callista leaned toward the speaker, her tone casual, almost indulgent, as if she were ordering lunch. It's the least you can do. After all we did for you. A laugh burst out of me. short, incredulous, without warmth. All you did for me? It's temporary, my mother added quickly, her voice fluttering, uncertain. The house is so beautiful, Daisy, and you have so much space. 10 years, not a birthday card, not a voicemail, not a single hand reached out during the nights I thought I wouldn't make it to morning. Now they wanted shelter, as though they hadn't burned mine to the ground. I kept my voice level. You erased me, remember? On the screen, my father's jaw flexed. He stepped forward and knocked on the iron gate, the dull clang carrying through the speakers. Open up, don't be dramatic. We're not here to fight. I'm not opening the gate. My fingers stayed steady on the button, though my chest tightened. This isn't your home. Daisy, Callista said, voice dripping honey but hard beneath. You've always been stubborn, but family is family. We have a right. I stepped back from the monitor, leaving the screen to glow in the empty foyer. My heels clicked softly as I crossed to the living room. The house was quiet except for the ocean wind rattling faintly at the windows. I pulled my grandmother's scarf from the arm of the sofa and wrapped it around my wrist like a bandage, grounding myself in her strength. They stayed for hours, demanding, persuading, waiting. But I did not open the gate. That night, long after their silhouettes had finally disappeared down the road, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine. The ocean hissed against the rocks below, relentless and unconcerned. I scrolled through my phone, pulling up old archived voicemails. Not one from them, not through college, when I worked double shifts, not when I founded the shelter, not when the first ribbon was cut. A decade of silence, and now they wanted to claim it. The lights from my security system swept across the lawn, casting long shadows. I whispered into the dark, not for anyone to hear, but for myself. Let them stand in the silence they left me in. Just as I set down my glass, the intercom blinked again. A message waiting. I pressed play without thinking. My father's voice spilled into the quiet, low and edged. You'll regret not letting us in. The threat curled in the air like smoke. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond. I simply sat there, the scarf cool against my wrist, while the waves carried his words away. Just another storm spent against the shore. 3 days after they left that warning at my gate, I packed my carry-on and headed to Savannah for an executive summit. It was a necessary part of the foundation's future, new investors, a potential grant from a national wellness initiative. I had booked the hotel myself, a modest but quiet place with blackout curtains and a view of the Riverwalk. Before leaving Charleston, I double-checked every access code, instructed my staff to report anything out of the ordinary, and reminded myself that my family had no key. Or so I thought. On the second night, I sat alone in my hotel room, still in the navy sheath dress I'd worn for the day's final panel. My shoes were off, hair pinned loosely, and I was sipping mint water while reviewing notes on trauma-informed design for shelters. My phone lit up with a motion sensor alert from my front gate back home. For a few seconds, I ignored it. Probably just a deer again. Charleston was full of them. But the second alert was from the side entry, and the third from the foyer. My heart froze. I tapped into the live feed, expecting a glitch. Instead, I watched as my father swaggered through the side entrance, holding up a tarnished silver key. He chuckled as he unlocked the door, shaking his head like he'd just won a bet. Knew she wouldn't change the locks, he said, loud enough for the camera mic to catch. Behind him, my mother followed with 2 wheeled suitcases. Callista entered last, toting a designer bag in one hand and a green juice in the other, like she was returning to a weekend retreat. They didn't hesitate. They walked straight inside. My father placed his bag at the foot of the staircase. My mother called out something about the sheets being better in the south wing. And Callista, she helped herself to my espresso machine. I watched in stunned silence as she poured almond milk into my mug, one of a custom set, hand-thrown by a local potter, and walked barefoot into my sunroom, wearing one of my silk robes. I clenched my teeth so hard I felt something in my jaw pop. Then she did it. Callista propped her feet up on my coffee table, turned the camera just slightly toward her, and pressed record. Back where we belong, she said, fake sweet, with a little sparkle in her eyes. Family first. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't scream. I didn't call the police right away. Instead, I watched. I observed. I documented. They walked back into my life like burglars calling themselves heirs. They unpacked. They spread. They occupied. They acted like this house still belonged to them, like they'd simply forgotten something last Christmas and were now reclaiming it, as if I were the one intruding on a legacy. For a moment, I felt something dangerously close to the old shame, that twisted childhood feeling that maybe, if I had just stayed quiet, they wouldn't have turned on me. But then I noticed the necklace. As Callista leaned toward the camera again, her robe fell open just enough to reveal the gold chain around her neck. No, it was unmistakable. A dainty locket shaped like a teardrop, etched with a single magnolia flower. I had bought that necklace with my first paycheck at 19, spent 3 months saving tips from waiting tables. I wrapped it in tissue and tucked it inside my grandmother's handkerchief. I remembered the look on my mother's face when I handed it to her that Christmas, how she pressed a kiss to my forehead and whispered, "It's beautiful, Daisy. I'll treasure it always." And now, it was swinging above Callista's wineglass while she laughed into my camera. She turned to my mother, visible now at the edge of the shot, and said, "Honestly, it suits me better anyway." I didn't move for several seconds. My hands stayed still, palms flat on the desk. I stared at the screen, at the home I had built being defiled one smug smile at a time. I could have called them immediately. I could have screamed. Instead, I opened a clean email draft and typed 5 words to my legal team. Initiate action. I want them out. Within the hour, I had forwarded all the footage, timestamped and backed up. My attorney responded within 20 minutes. "We'll proceed in the morning. Charleston PD will assist." I slept only a few hours that night, my mind calculating every move. No rage, no panic, just precision. They had trespassed into the wrong version of me. The old Daisy might have frozen. This one planned. By dawn, I was checked out of the hotel, coffee in hand, and headed north on I-95 back toward Charleston. The streets were still damp from an early drizzle when I arrived. My heels clicked against the front steps, steady, intentional. 2 uniformed officers stood beside me. I unlocked the door with my fingerprint. No words, just procedure. Inside, the scent of my lavender diffuser clashed with the stale trail of perfume and burnt espresso. My mother was the first to see me, standing in the kitchen with a tea towel in hand. "Daisy, you didn't expect to be caught," I said flatly. Callista stepped into the hallway behind her, her robe still on, her hair in loose waves like she'd just come from a spa. "What's going on?" she asked, voice clipped. The lead officer addressed them both. "Ma'am, sir, we have evidence that you entered this property without the owner's consent. You're being asked to leave immediately." My father stormed in from the living room, fists clenched, already ready to object. "This is our family home," he barked. "You can't just throw us out." "This isn't your home," I said, gaze locked. "It never was. This isn't your home. It never was." The words had come out of my mouth in a voice I barely recognized, steady, clipped, final, not raised, not trembling, not uncertain. It was a tone I had never been granted as a girl. It was a tone that ended conversations. I stood in the entryway of the house they had once tried to turn into a stage, my back to the staircase, the wide Atlantic wind pressing faintly against the windows behind me. I didn't move. I didn't waver. I held my ground. The 2 officers shifted slightly at my back, their boots squeaking against the marble floor. They weren't here to arrest anyone or break up a fight. They were here for presence, for the weight of authority in case the family who had once sold me out decided to rewrite the rules again. Across from me, my father, Callista, and my mother formed a strange tableau. Each one reacted in their own way. Wardell glared as if sheer force of will could push me back into obedience. His eyes burned the same way they had when I was 16 and too tired to finish the chores before bed. Callista gave a short, brittle laugh, her voice pitched like a sitcom actress trying to smooth over an awkward pause. She never did like silence unless it belonged to her. And my mother, she stood clutching a tea towel as though it were a lifeline, her fingers twitching against the fabric. Her eyes darted between my face and the papers in my hand, as if she were searching for some softer version of me she could bargain with. I extended the envelope. "This is for you," I said evenly. "All of you." The older officer stepped forward, took the envelope from me, and held it out to my father. Wardell didn't take it right away. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the embossed letterhead peeking from the flap. "What is this, Daisy?" he asked, his voice low, testing. "A choice," I replied. "One you never gave me when you forged my name on a land deed." Callista's manicured hand shot out, snatching the envelope before he could touch it. She slid it open with a sharp nail, sliding the pages free. The sound of paper tearing echoed louder than it should have in the cavernous hall. Her eyes skimmed the first clause. Her smirk faltered. Then it vanished altogether. "Are you serious?" she asked, looking up at me with disbelief edged in panic. "I'm serious," I said. She let the papers fall from her hand, letting them scatter across the polished tile. The contract fanned out like discarded playing cards. "This is extortion." "No." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This is consequence." The officers stood still, but the tension thickened, stretching across the room like a drawn bow. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, hitting the floating dust motes and turning them into tiny golden flecks. The light made everything feel staged, theatrical, except this was no play. "The contract gives you two options," I continued, my tone as precise as the ink on the page. "Option 1, sign over any remaining family claims to my property and assets. In exchange, I'll provide a 3-month allowance to help you settle somewhere else. Option 2, you vacate immediately. No allowance." "No courtesy," Wardell's voice rumbled low, dangerous. "You think you can buy us out?" "No," I said softly, but with iron in my throat. "I'm offering you a landing instead of a lawsuit." Callista barked out another laugh, brittle this time, more like glass breaking than amusement. "You built all this because of us, because of the name, because of the family. Don't pretend you did it alone." I met her eyes steadily, unblinking. "I built all of this without you. You only showed up when you ran out." The words seemed to settle on the air like dust. For a long moment, no one spoke. My mother sank down into a chair at the kitchen island as though her knees had given out. Her hands kept worrying the edge of the tea towel, twisting and untwisting it. "Daisy," she whispered, but the sentence broke apart before it formed. I drew in a long breath, let it steady me. "Do you know what I remember most?" I asked, almost conversationally. Their blank looks told me they didn't. "It wasn't the punch," I said. "Not even the forged signature. It was the chair." Confusion flickered across their faces, but the memory surged through me sharp as ever. "It was Callista's graduation dinner," I continued. "I had worked a double shift to pay for her gift, came straight from the restaurant, still smelling of fryer oil. Every chair at the table was taken, and Dad said, 'You should have come earlier if you wanted a place.' So I stood in the corner by the kitchen and ate dessert out of a paper napkin. That moment burned deeper than your slap ever did." My father looked away. Callista rolled her eyes, but for once she didn't speak. "That's why I don't feel guilty about this contract," I said, my voice sharpening. "I learned my place a long time ago. Now I've built my own table." I didn't demand their signatures on the spot. I didn't want theatrics. I wanted clarity. "Take the night," I told them evenly. "But remember, tomorrow the locks change permanently." I turned to leave, the echo of my heels filling the space. Behind me, my mother's voice cracked. "We're family, Daisy." I stopped. I looked back, straight through her, straight through the years, through every empty chair they'd saved for someone else. "Then why?" I asked, voice steady but sharp enough to cut. "Did you save a chair for everyone but me?" The silence that followed bent the air itself. The officers shifted awkwardly. My father's face had gone an unfamiliar shade, not rage, not shame, but something raw, something cornered. Callista kept staring at the contract on the floor as if it might spring up and strike her. I crossed to the hallway bench, picked up my bag, and slung it over my shoulder. I'll be back in the morning, I said. Choose wisely. The front door opened easily under my hand, and when I stepped out onto the porch, the ocean breeze struck my face, cool and cleansing. The next morning, I sent out the final set of invitations. No embossed cardstock this time, no ribbon, just a simple digital file titled, A Night of Legacy. Clean font, navy background, RSVP required. The guest list was curated carefully. Investors, city council members, donors, 2 journalists I trusted, and a local nonprofit liaison. I kept the head count tight. Every seat would matter. My family received theirs via email. Same invite, no special note. They wouldn't suspect anything. They'd think I was playing polite. They always mistook my silence for submission. By the following evening, the house was transformed. The ballroom shimmered under strings of amber lighting, the polished floor glowing like honey. A string quartet played quietly near the corner bay windows, while servers in black carried trays of canapes. The scent of rosemary and citrus floated gently in the air. I wore black, simple, classic. My hair was pulled back, makeup soft. I didn't want attention. I wanted focus. People greeted me with air kisses and warm handshakes. They asked about expansion plans, about the upcoming shelter in Colombia. I smiled. I answered every question with ease. At precisely 7:45 p.m., I nodded to Olivia, my tech assistant, stationed behind the projector screen. She caught my signal immediately. The string quartet stopped. The lights dimmed slightly. A small sound cue, just a chime, signaled the presentation was beginning. I walked to the center of the room and took the mic. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, certain. Good evening, I began. Tonight isn't about my foundation, though I thank each of you for supporting it. Tonight is about legacy, and the cost of pretending something is whole when it's been broken for years. There were a few chuckles, a few raised brows. Then the projector buzzed to life. The first slide filled the wall behind me, a scan of a legal document. The Roan legacy, what they hid. Slide 2, the original land deed, mine, and the forged version, side by side. Slide 3, dated email communications from the family lawyer at the time, warning me, ignored by others. Slide 4, the bank transaction logs that proved family funds were redirected into Callista's failing boutique. Then came the footage, security camera clips of Callista walking through my home in my robe, her voice clear. Back where we belong, #family first. Another clip, my father unlocking the side gate with a duplicate key, grinning into the lens. Callista again, laughing. Honestly, it suits me better anyway. And then, the final clip. The original security audio from 10 years ago. The dinner. My voice challenging the land sale. The sound of a slap. And Callista's line, cold and unmistakable. Why are we surprised? Trash stays trash. Gasps filled the room. One man dropped his glass. Another murmured to someone next to him, "Is this real?" I turned back to face them, letting the screen go dark. No one moved. They called me trash, I said, steady. But I built an empire from what they threw away. Wardell tried to stand. "This is a smear job," he snapped. "You think you're clever?" But Olivia had already moved to the next slide. A screenshot of his trespassing citation with the police report timestamp underneath. A ripple of conversation passed through the room. No one interrupted again. I raised my glass, not with a toast, but with resolve. "To family," I said. "The ones who teach you who not to become." People applauded, not all at once. There was a moment of stunned quiet, but then the room filled with it, and it wasn't polite clapping. It was the kind people do when they've just seen someone fight back without raising their voice, the kind of applause that says, "We believe you." Callista stood and left, heels clicking hard on the marble. My mother stayed in her seat, trembling. My father didn't say another word. For the first time in my life, he had nothing. After the guests trickled out, after the lights returned to their normal hue and the string quartet packed their instruments, I remained in the center of the ballroom, heels off, barefoot against the cool floor. The silence felt clean, not heavy. They started the story. I just rewrote the ending. The lights dimmed. The last of the guests drifted out of the ballroom with half-finished champagne flutes and stunned expressions. Some touched my shoulder gently in passing, whispering things like, "You were so brave," or "They didn't deserve you." I nodded, polite, not really needing comfort. I stayed there long after the string quartet had packed up, after the staff had cleared the last canapé. My heels lay beside me on the marble floor, my bare feet cool against the stone. They started the story. I just rewrote the ending. I didn't post anything afterward. No follow-up, no explanations. But someone else had. A short, shaky video, captured from the middle of the ballroom, was already circulating by dawn. It showed the final slide of the presentation, the time-stamped footage of my family breaking into my house, Callista in my robe, Wardell with his smug face holding a key like a trophy, and then, my voice, calm and unsparing. They called me trash. I built an empire from what they threw away. It spread like wildfire. I didn't need to fan the flames. By noon, my inbox was full. Press inquiries, community leaders wanting to talk, 2 board members privately congratulating me for handling it with such restraint. But I wasn't interested in media victory laps. I was focused on what came next. The final strike. I pulled up Velma Caro's contact in my phone. Velma had been our housekeeper for over a decade. She had watched me grow up, made me soup when I was sick, helped me get ready for prom. But she had also witnessed more than she ever should have had to. The shouting, the bruises covered with foundation, the silence afterward. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, but I knew she hadn't forgotten. "Velma," I said when she picked up, her voice as soft as I remembered. "I need a favor, a big one." There was a pause. Then she said, "Baby, I've been waiting 10 years for this call." By the end of the day, Velma had recorded a 5-minute video. No script, no prompting, just truth. She sat in her kitchen, hair pulled back in a scarf, wearing her faded blue apron. Her voice didn't shake once. "I saw them fake her signature," she said into the camera. "Isolde practiced Daisy's handwriting over breakfast. I thought it was for a school project. I didn't realize what they were doing until later. And when I asked, she told me, 'Don't meddle in family business.'" She paused then, looked off to the side like she was seeing something years away. I kept quiet because I needed the paycheck. That's the truth. But not a day went by that I didn't regret it. The video aired on local news within 24 hours. By the next morning, the ripple effects were everywhere. Isolde's ties to the Community Literacy Board were severed. Her spot on the mayor's wife's charity brunch was quietly withdrawn. Callista's PR firm issued a statement that she was on indefinite leave pending internal review. And then came the custody hearing. I didn't attend. I watched the live stream in my office, alone. The judge's voice was clear, firm, almost bored. Moral manipulation, emotional instability, and recent public conduct. This court finds the mother unfit for sole custody at this time. Callista didn't cry, at least not on camera, but the look on her face wasn't one I'd ever seen before. Not anger, not superiority. It was something smaller, confused, like someone realizing the party was over and no one had saved them a ride home. She called me trash. The court just called her unfit. After the ruling, I shut my laptop slowly and walked outside. The air was crisp, early fall starting to tinge the breeze. I walked to the edge of the property where the marsh met the rocks and kicked off my shoes. I walked barefoot in the sand, just like I had 10 years ago when I left that dinner bleeding and barefoot. Only this time, the ground felt solid beneath me. I thought about every word Callista had thrown at me, every time she rolled her eyes when I spoke, every name she whispered about me to cousins behind closed doors. I thought about her snatching my necklace, her voice echoing from my own security camera, saying, "It suits me better anyway." But now, silence followed her. Not laughter, not claps, just silence. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. A motion alert from the gate. I walked slowly back to the house, feet brushing against stone. When I reached the monitor, I saw her. Callista stood at the gate, arms wrapped around herself, red-eyed. Her hair was pulled back, and for the first time in my adult life, she looked small. She leaned in toward the intercom and whispered, barely above a breath, "Please, just help me this once." She didn't know the cameras had already recorded her words. She didn't know I was watching live. But I did nothing. Not yet. I simply stood there and let the weight of her sentence hang between us. "Please, just help me this once." The voice crackled through the intercom like a whisper trapped in static. "Please, just help me this once." I stared at the screen in the security panel, watching Callista's face, wet mascara trails, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched like someone who hadn't slept in days. It was a look I never imagined seeing on her. Vulnerability didn't wear well on Callista Roan. Part of me wanted to turn away, shut off the screen, let her stand out there and feel the same silence she once weaponized against me. But then, my grandmother's voice floated up from the back of my mind, soothing, steady. "Kindness is strength, sugar. But never mistake it for permission." I tapped the keypad. The gate buzzed open. By the time she reached the front door, I had already placed a warm plate of food on the kitchen island and laid a folded towel next to a bottle of water. I didn't open the door for her. I let the bell ring once, twice. Then I unlocked it and stepped aside. Callista stood in the entryway like a ghost. Her duffel bag was slung low, scuffed and half-zipped. She looked smaller somehow, shrunk down by the weight of her own pride. "Come in," I said quietly. She didn't speak, just walked inside, glancing around like it was her first time seeing the place. The last time she'd been here, she was barefoot in my robe, sipping from my coffee machine and mocking me on camera. Now she didn't even meet my eye. We sat in the foyer, across from each other on the same bench where I'd once waited for the locksmith to change the locks. I reached into the drawer of the credenza beside me and pulled out a plain manila file. "You applied to the Carolina Women's Wellness Shelter last week, didn't you?" Her head snapped up. "How did you—" "I'm the founder," I said. "My name's not on the public site, but I built it." She swallowed hard. The pause that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. "We turned down your application," I continued. "You were flagged for disruptive behavior and failure to comply with intake procedures." "I didn't cause trouble," she said, voice cracking. "They were rude. They asked the same questions they ask every woman," I cut in, not unkindly. "They asked about responsibility, about the past. They didn't judge, but they needed honesty." She shifted in her seat, eyes darting toward the hallway like she might bolt. "You've burned a lot of bridges, Callista," I said, softer now. "Even if you forget what you did, the system remembers." I stood and walked to the island. I returned with the plate of food, simple stew and a piece of cornbread, still warm. I also handed her an envelope with 2 crisp bills inside. "Eat, rest, take the cash," I said. "But this isn't forgiveness, it's clarity." She opened her mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to thank me. I didn't wait to hear which. I walked upstairs and left her alone in the house she once tried to claim. 2 hours later, she was gone. The plate was in the sink, rinsed. The envelope was gone. The towel was folded neatly on the bench. I didn't need to check the cameras. I knew she wouldn't come back. 3 weeks later, I was at a bistro on King Street. I was meeting with potential partners from Atlanta, discussing a new retreat program for survivors of generational trauma. We were halfway through lunch, deep into a budget proposal, when the server appeared. "Good afternoon. Ready to order?" I looked up. Callista. She wore the restaurant's standard black uniform, her hair tied back. No makeup, no jewelry, just a pen tucked behind one ear and a notepad in her hand. She froze when she saw me. Her throat bobbed. The tray she held tilted slightly, and a water glass slid off. It shattered near my chair. She dropped to her knees instantly, muttering, "I'm so sorry, before falling silent again. The people at my table stared, unsure what to say. I leaned forward and helped pick up the largest shard. Our hands didn't touch. I flagged the manager with a nod. "No problem at all," I said. "Accidents happen." Callista rose slowly. Her hands were shaking. I left a $100 bill on the table before we left, tucked neatly under my dessert spoon. As I stepped outside, I paused just long enough to say, without looking back. Trash? That was always your word, not mine. The late afternoon sun bathed the Charleston sidewalks in gold, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. I walked the rest of the way to the waterfront, listening to the hush of waves against the stone. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. Sometimes, the loudest victory is silence. The morning after I saw Callista at the restaurant passed slowly, quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone when I woke up. No news alerts, no inbox checks. I just opened the windows, let the sea air roll in, and sat still. The media had moved on. The Roan scandal, as they'd called it, was now buried beneath the noise of city elections and local crime headlines. My family name no longer trended. But I hadn't moved on, not entirely. By noon, I found myself drawn to the back porch, cradling a cup of chamomile tea in both hands. The air had a softness to it, the kind that comes right before a seasonal change. I wrapped my grandmother's scarf around my shoulders, not for warmth, but for grounding. There's something about old cotton that feels more protective than any armor. At my feet sat a wooden box, scratched, stained in places, and sealed tight with a latch I hadn't opened since the day I walked out of that house at 19. I had packed it in a rush then, tucked between an extra pair of shoes and my shame. For years, I carried it from one apartment to the next, from a tiny dorm to my first office, but I never opened it. Not once. Today felt like the right day. I lifted the lid with careful fingers. Dust gave way to the scent of cedar and thyme. The first thing I saw was a photograph, creased and curling at the edges. In it, I was 6 years old, arms wrapped around Delphine's waist, both of us laughing so hard our eyes were nearly shut. My front teeth were missing. She wore her favorite gardening hat, the one with the yellow ribbon. Underneath the photo was a drawing, childlike, vibrant. Crayons had smeared slightly, but the label in bold letters still read, "Me Grandma, Daisy R." The stick figures wore matching dresses, and I'd drawn her holding a pie. Beneath that was an old cassette tape in a plastic case, cracked along one side. A faded label read, "You are my sunshine, Daisy, age 7. I didn't have a tape player anymore, but I remembered recording it, sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching a wooden spoon like a microphone, while Delphine smiled behind the camera and hummed along. At the bottom of the box was a letter, folded into a perfect square. Her handwriting was unmistakable, curvy, confident, a little dramatic. "Daisy girl," it began. "You are not them. That's why you'll hurt more, but you'll also rise more. Don't let their noise drown out your quiet truth. You were born with a fire they tried to put out, and that tells you everything you need to know. Keep the fire. Always. Love, Grandma D." The tears came slowly. Not a flood, not grief, just release. It had taken me years to cry like that, not out of pain, but because someone had loved me enough to see me before I saw myself. I closed the box gently and set it beside me. As I sipped the last of my tea, I noticed a plain envelope sitting beneath the doormat, cream-colored, unsealed. Postmarked 3 days earlier. No return address. I knew who it was from before I unfolded it. The handwriting was thinner now, shakier. Years of denial showed in every uneven loop. "Daisy," it began. "I failed you not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't have the courage to love you in front of them. I stood by while they erased you, and I helped them do it by keeping quiet. I hope that one day the silence between us won't be shame." It wasn't signed with Mom. Just a name, Isolde. I folded the letter and placed it back into the box, unlocked. That felt important. The wound between us hadn't healed, but it didn't have to fester either. Some scars don't close, they just learn to stop bleeding. Later that evening, as the sky burned amber over the marsh, I went inside and retrieved the chair Delphine had left me in her will. It was hand-carved, low to the ground, with a cushion she'd sewn herself. I carried it to the front porch. I placed it just beside the steps, where the sun touched the edge of the railing, and sat down with a fresh cup of tea. No one stood behind me. No one needed to. I looked out over the garden and whispered to no one in particular. I never got a seat at their table, so I made one of my own. And from this seat, no one will ever erase me again. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means reclaiming your peace. This story wasn't just about revenge. It was about drawing a line, setting boundaries, and choosing your own worth when the people closest to you won't. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up because of family? What would you do if they came back years later, like nothing happened? If this story moved you or reminded you of something from your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true life stories that speak to the heart.